Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna. To most Kaimerans, the realms beyond the known world are shrouded in mystery and danger. That most expeditions are claimed by storm and beast is enough to make all but the bravest explorers wary. Kaimerans may need twice as much food as humans, considering their high metabolic needs of their hereditary magic, but as they have a reliable access to enchanted grains in their homeland, and their population doesn't grow at a rate that pressures expansion, there hasn't been much initiative for them to go beyond the known world. Of course, there have been those bold and brave fools who seek to fill in the gaps of knowledge, but this has always been motivated by curiosity, not necessity. Fortunately for those who wish to know what exists beyond the edges of most maps, the Temple of Knowledge, which is the Great Library, has been funding exploratory missions for thousands of years. Though there are wanderers and scholars from every culture, having such a profound backlog of information has meant the chroniclers of the Great Library are adding little pieces to 1,000 grand puzzles rather than trying to build one's own knowledge of the world from hearsay and what observations they can fit in on their own. A robust knowledge base is how the Great Library knows so much about the world, and that includes at least a cursory understanding of the entire planet's geography, flora and fauna, and cultures of all the peoples who call this enormous planet home. Within the past century or so, humans from the Assembly have been granted permission to explore beyond the known world as well, under a number of restrictions and regulations, chief among them being that they have no contact with any sentient beings. This is partly a holdover of humans having a reputation as vectors of diseases, but the reality is a mild cold to an Earth human could well be a lethal respiratory infection to another human species, so the practice is not without merit. As their contact in the Free States and Portal City don't want to deal with other nations knowing much about Earth or risking their own disease transmission, the Assembly must also minimize their presence outside of the Portal City, Rooster Crest Island, on which the Assembly has a substantial base and university, and a few designated research posts beyond the known world. Firearms in these outposts are permitted, but heavily restricted in number and utility. In short, a few weapons that will reliably drop large, dangerous game, but won't have much of a military application if they get in the wrong hands of the Free State's rivals. With this small supply of defenses, numerous teams have gone out to conduct censuses over the years, usually using charts and maps from the Great Library as a guide. Although the focus of these missions is often to better understand magic, curiosity at the natural history of Kaimere has driven many expeditions as well. Several such expeditions have taken place in the monsoon forest of western Arvel. The first expedition to this place, said to be a vibrant forest, instead found to be little more than a desert with a coastal mangrove swamp. Winds blew offshore to the northwest, bringing dry air and sand from the surrounding deserts, making it very difficult for their wind-powered vessels to reach the forest. Several outposts were built on coastal islands. There were records of people living here from the Great Library treatises, though it was a long time before any were encountered, and these Homo erectus descendants seemed as keen to avoid the Assembly agents as the agents were to avoid them. Although the lands looked barren, the crew quickly found themselves of these coastal forests and waters in the Bay of Timugai were teeming with life. Currents from the south brought cool, nutrient-rich water that supports an abundance of marine life, aided by regular offshore winds, pushing out warm water, which draws in cool and nutrient-rich upwells. Some animals from the polar seas migrate to this bay to avoid the cold winter months. The shorelines are mostly mangroves, so not much ample space for seals to lounge on, but there are enough beaches and offshore islands that they can make do. Many whales and seals are among these migrating species. Males of the boar seal, second largest pinniped in Kaimere, will also come to these waters to feed during the winter months. The great size coupled with thick hide means they are a daunting prospect for local predators. The fact that only males were found in the bay led to some initial misidentification of them as males of other smaller resident pinnipeds, but later studies show females tend to be more pelagic and remain in the southern coast of the continent during winter, where there isn't as much an abundant supply of food, but more beach space and far fewer predators. As females are as much as 10 times smaller than males, they need a whole lot less food, but are also more vulnerable to predators. At up to 5 tons and armed with formidable tusks, males of the boar seal have fewer predators to worry about, at least in the benthic shallows in which they feed on whatever squid, fish, smaller seals, seabirds, crustaceans, and sharks they can find. Though there are many dolphins that pass through, the most abundant is a residential generalist called the western snubnosed dolphin. They are presumed to belong to the same genus as Irrawaddy dolphins, or at least a sister genus, making them a close cousin to orcas and other blackfish in Kaimere. Like their larger cousins, western snub-nosed dolphins are highly intelligent and socially complex. As they thrive in shallows and don't do well in open water, they don't usually stray from the bay. A related animal is found in the known world, the eastern snub-nosed dolphin, and is much more rare, perhaps due to more competition or less ideal territory. The Bay of Timugai is shallow, quite like the inland sea of the known world, but it is much more loose sediment than seagrass, with some theorizing this is because of the offshore winds constantly bringing sand out from the desert. There's a lot of fish and other small prey, but without seagrass, there aren't nearly as many bulky grazers or benthic feeders. As a consequence, not nearly as many large predators. It's not all loose sediment, with some stretches of coast having a mangrove swamp for dozens of miles before land, and there are mangrove swamps within the bay itself, but it's quite different than what is seen in the inland sea of the known world. Kurajaku have been spotted, especially in the mangroves, but it isn't a great habitat for them, and there's not nearly enough bulky and slow yet powerful game for them to subsist upon. The waters are too shallow to appeal to Megalodon or Motomazor, and there's not enough reef space to cover for Catabo. While all of these have been spotted, by far the most abundant predator, and by a significant margin, is the saltwater crocodile. The salties of these waters are noted for being larger and lighter than those of the known world. Some consider them a distinct species, but the periodic darker salty from the inland sea has been seen and integrates just fine, so it likely represents a subspecies insular to this relatively isolated bay, as leaving these waters is quite deep on either side. They might not reach the size of the enormous predators of the inland sea, but with the largest males measuring 32 feet or nearly 10 meters, and average specimens being closer to 7 meters, they are quite formidable. There are so many mangrove swamps that juveniles can hide in the roots, growing fast on whatever little critters are wading through the roots with them. Although beach spaces to nest on is at a premium, smaller females have been seen making nests on mangrove root beds. The larger males don't have many places to lounge, at best resting on mangrove roots, but they don't really need shorelines. They may not be contenders for maritime kings in the grand scale of Kaimere, or even be counted among the top 5 largest crocodilians known to the Assembly, but they do seem to dominate by sheer numbers. As ectotherms who don't need to eat much, they can support an astonishing population compared to mammals and dinosaurian predators, and eat anything in their domain. While Kurijaku might have 10 to 15,000 adults throughout the inland sea at a given time, this bay is teeming with crocodiles. Estimates vary, but they assume the bay, its islands, and coastal mangroves could have 200,000 adult crocodiles. There are other predators, but from a sheer numerical perspective, these stealthy ambush hunters are unquestionably the rulers of the bay and its coastal swamps. Although the dry season's offshore winds mean the seas are at their most productive, the season is devastating to the land. The very offshore winds which push out warm water and draw in cool bounties from the deep oceans makes the bay so productive, not only makes the coast quite arid, it pulls in sand from the surrounding deserts to further dry out the land. During these months, which can make up 3/4 of the year, the only fresh water is from a few springs and glacial-sourced streams. Most animals that endure here are quite small, able to get by on scraps. The most abundant ungulates, a camel and horse, both less than a meter tall at the shoulder, make up a majority of mammalian prey species. They both live in small herds, with the most nimble camels in highlands and even climbing into trees to get whatever leaves may be available, while Abernethy's horse is much more restricted in range, yet able to get by on harsh grasses and sedges that might endure through the dry season. Even dry husks of completely dehydrated branches can sustain them. As discussed last week, the largest of the residential animals is the Hugaldun. These giants can support their bulk thanks to being able to reach higher leaves than the trees able to blossom in this context, mangrove trees that live in salt water. They shed their salt through the bark and leaves. Although all leaves are a bit salty, lower branches often have the highest concentration, especially a few sacrificial leaves that turn yellow and are shed from so much salt directed into them. The Hugaldun targets the mostly green leaves higher on the trees and are able to sustain themselves with this foliage throughout the harsh, dry months. A common dinosaur is the small yet heavily fortified Tetsuboros. These mace-tailed ankylosaurs are omnivorous, able to eat just about anything from roots and small game to grass and mangrove leaves, though they certainly prefer the terrestrial leaves and fruit, which are abundant in the monsoon season. They are also quite fond of eggs. They have a very impressive sense of smell, aided by wide-set nostrils which allow them a great deal of directional honing capabilities. Though their legs are short, they are surprisingly quick, and can also maintain a steady jog for a very long time. Their hardy nature, proficiency with travel, impressive defenses, and an adaptable diet is how the ankylosaur has gone from a relic population in western Arvel to spreading throughout the continent, north through Nikar, and even across the land bridge to Kyrule, where they are among the most abundant ankylosaurs. There are many elasmarians, a clade of basal ornithopod dinosaurs. Many are around the size of a cat. A common and larger genus is Echelosaurus, the bagpipe lizard. There are 2 species in these forests, but the genus can be found throughout the mountains of Arvel, with each species making their own distinctive songs. The air in their lungs is pushed into a pair of resonating chambers, first in their throat, then in a complex sinus apparatus. As they can store air in their throat and push it through their sinus apparatus while inhaling to replenish, the songs of Echelosaurus can persist without break for inhalation for minutes at a time. The largest elasmarian is the helmeted Runen drake. They are highly aggressive animals, responsible for more assembly agent deaths than any other animal in these forests, even crocodiles and other predators of the region. They are fast, and regular fighting others of their kind means their faces, necks, and chests are extremely thick skin and covered in scar tissue to the point that dropping one while it charges is surprisingly difficult. especially since they are fairly narrow animals. Grabbing with their jaws and lacerating with long claws means they make short work of people, and most predators in the area avoid them. While some are residential, feeding on mangrove leaves like the hugaldun and regularly sneezing out the extra salt they build up, some choose to follow other herbivores in leaving the forests after their last rains. Most abundant of these migrators is the enormous camel Camelus. Presumably a descendant of Camelus, this cursorial animal is the champion of distance travel. When ample food runs out, they split off out for the deserts. Some follow spring-source streams, others venture out to find oases and the forests which grow around them. Some oases are regular, lasting for thousands of years, but often they only last a few years or even a couple months. To find these short-term oases, which can be way stations between the larger lakes, Jesse's camel use an incredibly keen sense of smell to detect bacteria in the water up to 100 miles away if the winds are in their favor, which they usually are, considering the steady and reliable northwestern blow of the breeze for most of the year. With an extremely efficient stride thanks to very long legs, these camels can cover 40 to 50 miles a day, and considering they can go 20 days between drinks, they are perfectly suited to life in this desert. Other animals follow in their wake. The smallest ones, like songbirds and mouse monkeys, hitchhike on the camels. Sometimes these hitchhikers are tolerated, especially the ones that remove parasites from the camel's fur, but sometimes the camels will grab a hitchhiker if they are annoyed or want a little snack for the road. Several species of smaller Echelosaurus dinosaurs with the very long legs will follow camels. They may not be able to always keep up, but at the very least, they can follow the camel's trail to be sure to find water. Both Runen drake and hugaldun stallions sometimes choose to follow camels out into the desert, especially if the monsoon season was light in a given year. The drakes can easily keep pace, so even without a keen sense of smell, they are able to follow, especially since their vision is able to spot a group of camels or splash of green forest several miles off. Hugaldun aren't able to keep up, being quite bulky, and their feet aren't quite well suited for travel on sand, but if there isn't much food back home, sometimes they must take the risk. Often those hugaldun who follow camels can't keep up and are left to find water on their own. They can dominate a watering hole once they arrive, but if the camels have already drained the oasis and moved on by the time they make it, the Cockatras may perish as they lack the endurance needed to find more water. A few families of people were spotted traveling with these camel herds. As is assembly policy, they were avoided. Their abandoned settlements back on the coastal forests hadn't looked to support more than a few dozen people, and these nomads seemed to travel in groups of around that size. They had bows, suggesting contact with chimerans at some point, and a few rode on the back of great camels, but these camels didn't seem domesticated, just wild individuals that had been tamed. Without contact or communication, most conclusions would just be conjecture, and as this will not be the aim of this survey, the peoples were left to their own devices. The largest animal of these forests and its surrounding desert is the blue titan Arvelotitan. Like Jesse's camel, they have a very keen sense of smell, using it to find oases out in the desert once the monsoon season ends. They are not nearly as cursorial as camels, but with ample fat stores of their own, enabling them to go months without drinking water if they have to. They of course aren't nearly as cursorial as camels, but with ample fat stores of their own, enabling them to go a month without drinking if they have to, and their claws meaning they can access groundwater in ways other herbivores can't, they often find themselves doing just fine. In fact, subadults will often prefer to remain out in the desert rather than return to the forest when the monsoon season arrives. They weigh up to 15 tons, but take about twice as long to reach that size than Kipuro Titan does at more than double the mass, a consequence of having less reliable food. They can make short work of foliage even in a small oasis, and since they prefer plants like palm leaves and other herbivores turned down in favor of dates, citrus fruit, and grasses, Arvelotitan will often have plenty of food, even if they are late to the party. By far the most abundant large predators of both forest and desert is the silver Cockatras. This species of Inferno Gallus is a fairly recent arrival to the region, within the past 2 million years or so, but the cursoriality of this genus has made them especially successful. They rapidly reproduce, with a clutch size based on availability, including up to a dozen eggs, so they can quickly repopulate, and it only takes 2 years for them to reach adulthood. They can subsist on prey as small as rodents and little lizards, and have been recorded to cooperate as a mob in bringing down Hugaldun, giant camels, and even Arvelotitan, although these three are usually in poor health when such kills are made. Normally they are solitary, or either in a mated pair or sibling troop, and hunt alone for smaller game by themselves. Like other species of Inferno Gallus, they chase and harass prey to weaken it, able to jog for miles without tiring, thanks to their long limbs and the seemingly supernatural respiration of these theropods. And when it's time to make a kill, they bite to grapple and pierce the throat with a long hooked talon. This ability to travel efficiently and kill almost anything in their habitat has made these scrappy birds kings. Before they arrived, a species of Amphision was much more common and successful as a large predator. This is not the enormous Amphision dirus of the Warring Clades period. Amphision arconomagus, or the Hedgeback as Assembly called them, was a much smaller predator, though males standing up to a meter at the shoulder and weighing over 1,000 pounds still put them over the usual size of any terrestrial carnivore on Earth. Their sandy gray pelt helps even these large beasts set up an ambush in the scrublands of the desert forests. Unlike the silver Cockatras, which has put such competitive pressures on the Hedgeback that they are considered endangered, these predators can't venture out into the desert. They are astonishingly powerful animals, able to wrestle even a young Hugaldun stallion to the ground, but they have poor endurance and high caloric demands, and there's no reliable cover out in the desert. There are records of Hedgebacks killing several Cockatrases and surviving, and the two are viewed as archetypical rivals by the Assembly, but the reality is adult Cockatrases outnumber them by as much a 30 or 50 to 1. The Hedgeback has the advantage in a fight, but there's so much more to niche competition than a brawl, and this rivalry clearly favors the Cockatras on an ecological scale. Even so, both Hedgeback and Cockatras are only vassals to the apex predator of these forests. Styraconicus, the blue-masked Carnosaur, is the top predator of these forests and its surrounding desert. These megaraptorans aren't common, but measuring up to 30 feet long and weighing around 2 tons, they are the undisputed kings of this realm. Like other megaraptorans, they grab prey using their jaws and kill it with stab of their long claws. When killing prey small enough to carry, they will usually simply grab and stab, letting the struggling impaled prey kill itself with the very efforts it uses to escape, and only dealing further organ damage. Thick, elastic skin on their chest and neck allows them to ignore any retaliating strikes from prey in their arms, and since their arms are much closer to the center of balance and are very strong, they can carry a substantial load without being encumbered, and still keep a lookout, and even fight if they must. They are surprisingly lightweight for their size. Their bones are quite hollow, yet structured with internal struts for reinforcement, and there are ample air sacs in their chest. They are very muscular animals, but their light build helps reduce caloric demands and makes them much more efficient travelers than a mammal or hadrosaur in the same weight class. Their vision is excellent, both diurnal and nocturnal. Their sense of smell isn't particularly well developed, so they cannot track prey over long distances by scent, and they don't have ears nearly as keen as the robust monarchs, but their vision and height allows them to see very far, and seeing well into the ultraviolet spectrum not only helps them spot prey, they can also see blood trails to follow anything that might have escaped their grasp. Dominant individuals with established territory are the only ones that usually remain in the coastal forests year-round. Game is much more scarce, but beachcombing and even island hopping can supplement as long as they avoid the largest crocodiles. The challenges they face are also faced by their prey, so there are plenty of scavenging opportunities. Subordinates and subadults must often venture out into the desert and follow camels to survive. The Great Library recorded these as a venomous species, as they often bite and claw, then retreat from Hugaldun, that can reliably come back later to a dead animal. Closer observation and dissection by the Assembly proved this to be false, as their saliva and teeth are instead packed with bacteria, which seem to be particularly harmful to mammals. A rose by other name, perhaps, but they don't truly possess venom. For all the harshness the residents of this forest must endure through most of the year, their fortunes change in early summer. In this season, thanks to more direct sun on the planet's tilt, the land becomes quite hot. In contrast, not only are the oceans generally slower to warm, the cold currents from the south increase the disparity. This causes a shift in pressure that ultimately alters the direction of the winds. What once blew dry desert air over the forest and into the bay now draws in humid air and tropical storms from further north, constantly blowing this coastline with fresh water. Having several miles of mangrove forest between the coast and bay means that the fury of these storms is broken up, so the land gets the rain without the full might of the storm. As the wind shifts, all the animals out in the desert feel the change, and hurry back to what promises to be a smorgasbord of vegetation by the time they arrive. The residents are treated to the first pick of this glut, though unfortunately for them, most of the fruit takes a few weeks to fill in, so they have company by the time the best food arrives. Even so, there's plenty to go around, and there's so much fast-growing floral competition for real estate that whatever gets eaten is usually replenished by the next day. Megafauna are critical for food dispersal, helping these competitive plants stay far, so they invest a lot of sudden abundance in making a lot of appealing fruit and other seed casings. Unfortunately, the heat of the summer also means that nearby mountain glacial meltwater rivers are also at their peak flow, so a lot of fresh water comes from inland at a time when it's the last resource on anyone's list. As one might expect, this dramatic interplay of feast and famine is extremely important to the reproductive cycles of many animals. Hedgebacks will often mate in the winter, so their cubs are born at the beginning of the wet season. Unlike most large carnivores, Hedgeback mate for life, or at least for several years, and the male will help raise and feed their cubs. It is assumed this behavior is in response to Cockatras competition, as they will seek out Hedgeback cubs, though this is unconfirmed. Hugaldun mate toward the end of the dry season, so their nearly 2-year pregnancy ends with the first rains of the new year, and their calves are able to bulk up on a regular supply of milk on land and have a growth spurt in these first few months before their mother will have to spend much of her time browsing in mangroves and either have her calf swim alongside her or hide back on land. Arvelotitan eggs have the longest incubation period of any known dinosaur, 9 months. After enjoying the bounty to bulk up for a few months, the Titanosaurs engage in a violent duel typical of sauropods at the end of the rainy season. The losing males are killed and their bodies provide tons of meat as a sacrifice to local predators around which the females lay their eggs, fertilized by the winning bull. The predators keep away egg thieves, and by the time the sacrifice is claimed and the predators leave, the scent of the buried eggs has been masked by predator dung and rotting meat. For the next 9 months, the eggs incubate underground. When the first rain falls, the sauropodlets hatch and dig their way to freedom. As the rain turned the wasteland into a thriving thicket, there's plenty of places to hide and feed. Lots of these young are caught and eaten, of course, especially as predators join the mass migration back to the coastal forests, but the bounty which provides for them also offers so many other small critters that there's plenty to make it through. The wet season usually lasts into early autumn, although it can sometimes only comprise of a few storms or even take up half the year in extreme cases. However, eventually the waters catch up in temperature, the land itself cools, and the wind shifts direction, taking the humidity and its bounties with it. The coastal forest becomes barren once more. Animals either disperse out into the open deserts, or hunker down where they are and hope that they can endure the next storm comes to this land of feast and famine beyond the known world. Cheers to Ian for sponsoring this series. This forest is the setting of my first story in my next anthology. Set in 1910, Sprint of the Sea Snake follows Argonite, a Kentarine pirate, an agent to the pirate king Koban. As he is the fastest sailor in the known world, Argonite is hired by the Assembly to bring medicine to one of their research outposts alongside agents Arthur Baldwin and Charles Hartsfield. The outpost of around 30 naturalists and agents, which is just off the coast of this monsoon forest, has been hit by a wave of snake song. To Chimerans, snake song is a mild cough and dry throat. In humans, the virus ravages the respiratory system and leaves the patient extremely vulnerable to secondary bacterial infection, which is often fatal. Thankfully, the team, led by a Chimeran botanist, Dr. Ara, are on outpost studying the antibacterial qualities of mold that grows under the leaves of local mangrove trees. She can keep the worst bacterial infections down at first, but they don't have enough refined cultures for how many have fallen sick for more than a few days, and there's nothing they can do about the virus itself. Argonite can make what would normally be a 10 to 12 day voyage take less than half the time, but the outpost still loses people every day. Young humans recover faster, so the 3 students, alongside Dr. Aura and her other 2 Chimerans in the outposts, are the only who have recovered. Inotsu Kidyu, named Kratak, has been quarantined, so never got infected, and has kept up the outpost communication in the tower. The vampire, Agent Henry Abernathy, being an undead, never got the disease in the first place, and for the first few days was the only person able to aid the sick. As the treated cultures run out and more die each day, the 3 students sneak out to the mainland to get more mold samples. But it can buy the victims more time and stave off infection, as long as the students can avoid the many dangers inland. The story sees our heroes encounter many of the beasts introduced in today's episode. Lots of action and horror on a tense timeline. I've had a lot of fun writing it, and working on this episode as I write has been very helpful crossover. Cheers again to Ian for the sponsorship, to my Patreon patrons for your support, and thank you for watching. Until next time, stay fantastic everyone. Cheers folks!